Hi guys, Prime here. As promised, we're going to be going over the Egyptian god family tree, and just a few things before we get started. First up, there are several creational myths in Egyptian mythology, thanks to sort of distances between the peoples and time. So because of that, we're going to be going over a few different creational myths, and the second thing is that a lot of these myths follow certain universal powers. Usually in creational myths, the process of making life involves forging a body, a transfer of some segment of the divine essence or the creator to said body, and the animation of the body through the life or breath of life. Ra was strongly associated with the breath of life aspect of this, whilst Khnum, the forging part, but each god was tied to one method more heavily than the others. The creator may have been referred to as the one who made himself into millions, or he who made himself into millions of gods, and the process usually involved one being splitting themselves into several diverse elements that made up the universe, whilst keeping all of their godly powers somehow. With all of that said, let's get into Ra's origin. And before land came, there was darkness and the great nun. Out of the nun rose a shining egg who would be the all-powerful Ra. The secrets to his many powers lay within his name, but he had several of those. In dawn, he was Khepri. At noon, he was Ra, and in the evening, he was Anum. After saying those names, the sun rose in the sky. He named Shu the first winds, and they blew. Tefnut brought the rain, and Geb the earth. Nut brought the sky, and her hands and her feet pierced the horizons. They were happy. The great Nile that flowed in Egypt. Ra named life that grew on earth, and lastly named man. He then became the first pharaoh, ruling for several thousands of years, but with such time came age, and Ra's age lost him the respect of the people. So when the people mocked him, he summoned the gods whilst they still mocked him. He sought counsel from them, and the nun informed him that the best course of action was to set Sekhmet on them. The lioness slaughtered men too well, so Ra eventually took pity on them and called off the assault. Sekhmet wouldn't listen, so she had to be gotten drunk first. In the next myth, it's a lot shorter and a lot less bloody. A ram-headed god who originally ruled over the water, including those of the underworld potentially, fashions animals, birds, reptiles, people, and fish into being on his potter's wheel. He even brought the other gods into creation as well, and his name was Khnum. In another story, Toph emerged from the first bits of dry land to appear from the endless waters. The three powers that we spoke about before from myth to myth conceptualized as gods. Seer, the power of perception or insight, used for visualization of forms. Hu, the power of authoritative speech, the creator's power to speak things into being. And Heka, thoughts and commands becoming real or magic. Toph creates Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. He uses the process of divine knowledge or thinking, seeing the thing that he wants to make, then through divine utterance, speaking that thing into being, and finally, through divine energy, animating the subject or subjects. It's also said that in some variations of this myth, Khnum helped him to forge certain things, so there's that. In the Atum story, there's nothing save for the nun, primordial water. When a hill emerged from the water, Atum made himself from it, but was very lonely, and so decided to give himself a boost. His hand became his wife, who may have been several deities, including Hathor and Isuset. His hand was placed on his special area, and the juices that were formed from the resulting actions were placed in his mouth. Shu and Tefnut spawned from either his nose or his mouth, and that's how he got his nickname, the Great He-She, for having both male and female abilities. Random thought, though, just as I was thinking just before we got into the family tree part, Horus in-game being literally an eye, as we see that as his great symbol, that could be an interesting thing Hyros would do. I wonder where they'd necessarily go with that. I doubt that Hyros will actually do that, but hey, it could be an interesting spin to put on the character, but is that a horrible idea? Or would you actually like to see Hyros do something like that with Horus? Let me know in the comments below. So before we get into the family tree, we're going to finish off the rest of the stories. And we're going to start with Ra creating the earth. There are other variations of this story, but we're going to go with the Ra version. And so in this version, Ra is trying to create the earth, and as he's trying to do this, Geb and Nut are created, and they are inseparable. They won't move, but these two are literally the sky and the earth. So Ra can't continue creating things on the earth, and he's pretty mad. So he commands Shu, their father, to separate them. And so as Shu stands on Geb and lifts Nut away from him, the two begin to miss each other greatly. They also either can't have children, or Nut can't sort of release the children, I guess. Thoth sees the issue and knows that Ra is still pretty angry and will refuse to bring them together. So what happens is Thoth plays a game or tricks the moon into entering some sort of contest with him. Thoth then wins, but he wins too much, and what he wins is moonlight. And because of this, 5 extra days are given to a week, and Shu and Geb can have their children. These children are, of course, Osiris, Set, Nephthys, and Isis. Now, as some time passes, Osiris becomes a king. The 4 siblings marry, so Osiris and Isis are a couple, and Nephthys and Set are a couple. They all have their particular duties. Set in some way neglects Nephthys, but Isis and Osiris have a much happier and more stable relationship. Nephthys disguises herself as Isis and then goes to Osiris. They have a child together. Set finds out about this, is understandably upset, and murders Osiris. Now, there are variations as to how this goes down. Sometimes that justification is given for Set's actions. Others, it's not, because Nephthys doesn't necessarily do that. But he, for some reason or another, murders Osiris. And then he scatters Osiris's parts across the kingdom of Egypt. Isis then goes on a quest to recover all of these parts while partially fleeing from Set. Nephthys also has to flee from Set, but does give birth to Anubis at some point, abandons the child in some reeds, and continues to flee for her life. Isis adopts the child and raises Anubis. While searching for Osiris's parts, she finds more or less all of them and puts them together, and she's got a lot of power. She has the ability to put Osiris together, but she couldn't find his lost part. And when she eventually does find it, she places it within herself and eventually gives birth to Horus. Now, as Horus is growing up, he runs into Set, and there was a possible situation where Horus is taken advantage of by Set, but this doesn't happen. Horus prevents it from happening, and Set gives birth to Thoth in some myths. Of course, in this current myth, Thoth is already alive and well, but I'm just going to tell you the variation anyway. But during this whole time that Set has offed Osiris, he becomes the king of Egypt. And in some older variations of the myth, Neith is actually his wife. Ultimately, though, that's more or less everything you need to know, the gaps in between the story that I didn't fill in. So, there you go. Moving on to the family tree itself, we have Neith at the top. Technically, the nun would be at the top, but of the gods in Smite, Neith is at the top as the great All-Mother. She's mother to Sobek, Ra, and Khepri. Ra is the father of Anhur, Bastet, and Geb. Geb, the father of Osiris, Isis, and Set. Osiris is a father of Anubis, thanks to Set's deceptive wife. Horus is a son of Osiris and Isis. Serket is Horus's wife. And Thoth is a son of Set in this story. So, that was more or less the family tree of the gods and some origins in Egyptian mythology. I hope that you enjoyed and weren't too disturbed by that last one there. If you were wondering, Neith and Thoth both do have creational stories. You can check those out in their respective videos that I've done for them. Or at least Thoth. I know I talked about Thoth's story in his video. I might not necessarily have talked about Neith. But Neith is a pretty powerful figure in Egyptian mythology whose power was slowly nerfed through the whole process of syncretism that shows up in Egyptian mythology. An easy way to describe what that is pretty much a redo of the myths. Like, for example, Thoth wasn't necessarily this all-powerful god that had his own creational myths, but eventually it was believed that he did by people that emerged, and boom. So there you go. I hope that you enjoyed the video, at least learned something new. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and of course subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you want to see me do more videos like this, going over family trees and creational myths, go ahead and leave a request for the next pantheon you'd like me to do. And till the next video, have a very good day. I've been Brian. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.